Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together, we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week, we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
Yeah. All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, everyone.
Gosh, we used to do a topic episode. I'm so excited. I enjoyed our encyclical, but now we're back to topics. So,
well, and in getting into this topic, we found another encyclical.
I know, right?
Which is really good.
I know. It's like a rabbit. And now I feel like that we're going to hit like an encyclical rabbit hole where we're just going to have multiple encyclicals. I actually was thinking now, I'm like, gosh, we might have to do like a 2-day-a-week podcast because we're going to have like encyclical reading and then like a topic or an interview. And like really the bank of all the stuff I have to edit now is kind of stacking up. So I'm like, okay, this will take us out for a while here. But
yeah.
Anyway, all that to say, today is we're going to focus, I feel like this is appropriate coming off of our encyclical actually, on responsible motherhood. So we'll talk about responsible motherhood, responsible fatherhood, but I wanted to bring up this topic because it's something I think about a lot as a mom. And I feel like responsibility comes up a lot in my faith and in a kind of an examination of conscience and in scripture, you know, just personal responsibility for what God has given me and good stewardship over what God has given me. And I think the word responsibility, I think, is both empowering and somewhat intimidating. And as a sinner, sometimes something I try to push off or avoid. I actually do say that quite a bit. Like I am trying to avoid at all possible any excessive amounts of responsibility. Anything extra on my plate, I'm like, nope, I'm good. Thanks. I've already got enough. So I think when we talk about parenthood and specifically motherhood, there's a lot to ponder. And when I brought this up with Emily as like a possible topic, I was thinking about this project I was working on, which is when this topic kind of first popped into my mind. So this is months ago, maybe 6 months ago now or more. I was doing some policy work for like a think tank, and forgive me because I'm not going to remember every detail. Okay. But we're like in this virtual meeting, and one of the guys was sharing with us like their key points they're going to bring forward to the state legislature for them to be considering, and like policy suggestions and our ideas to help strengthen the family and address certain societal issues such as like, you know, teen pregnancy, or in this case, it was specifically out of wedlock pregnancy and birth. And so children being born without the stability of a mother and father in the same home, living and working and raising children together. And the policy idea, and again, forgive me because I'm not remembering it exactly, was something to the effect of making policy so that men were responsible for child support at the point of conception, something along those lines. And so I'm in this meeting, people are talking back and forth, and I just felt so like restless with that idea, Emily. And because I just was thinking about both my lived experience and just like intellectually pondering, what about the mom though? Like, she's also responsible for the conception of that child. And just for all the people who are going to maybe say, well, what about women that are raped and conceive a child? Okay. And we're not talking about that situation because that's actually like on the fringes when we're looking at like the bell curve of children conceived outside of marriage. The bell, like the main majority, is not in rape. It's in consensual sexual activities between a female and a male. They're consensual. They were both, decided to engage in this act of intercourse. And then a child comes to be. And kudos to the mom who doesn't abort the baby and has the baby and either puts the baby up for adoption or raises the child, even in the absence of the child's father. Because women, we just know physiologically, right? Again, emotions aside, just looking at our female structure versus the male physiology and structure, we are the ones that bear children. So we have a lot more riding on acts of intercourse than men do. And so anyway, during this kind of policy discussion, I was just thinking about well, if a male and a female enter into an act of intercourse together, a child is conceived in kind of an unwanted fashion. They just wanted to enjoy the pleasurable aspect of that act. They didn't want to have a baby come from it, but a baby did come from it because that's the act that happens in, even with using certain type of, contraceptive methods, birth control methods, that can still happen. And so what part or what role of responsibility do women have in, let's say, fatherless homes, right? Fatherless homes. And I think it's a very sensitive topic to bring up, and especially in our culture, because we raise single mothers to the point of sainthood, and I have single mothers in my family, my extended family, people that have been very close to me. I know lots of single moms, and they're doing a heroic, hard job. I have a husband and it's a hard job. Motherhood is a hard job. Let's just start that foundation. Motherhood is hard. We'll talk about fatherhood another time, but motherhood is hard. It's very demanding. And to do that without support, live-in support from someone who's equally invested and loves the children as much as you do is excruciatingly hard. So this does not undermine that reality. I think I just want to have a conversation about our responsibility, because I think in our culture, we often neglect that. Like in this policy conversation, it's very much women are the victim and men are evil in this situation. And to some extent, I understand that, right, Emily? Like women are the victim, quote unquote, in as much as unless they have an abortion, they literally can't escape the fact that there's a baby growing inside of them. Unless they kill the baby, it's just reality. So they can't walk out the door. Whereas men can walk out the door. But I interpret that scenario to say, in the midst of deciding whether to participate in the sexual act or not, women hold a lot more of the responsibility on their shoulders, because a lot more of the outcome weight is going to fall on them too. And this is, again, I'm pregnant, I'm married, this is my fourth baby. And I'm just thinking, Joey and I are constantly having this conversation as we're getting closer to the due date, Emily. In fact, we had it again this morning, that I kind of go through little spurts of freak out in my mind. And this is so little and minor and kind of first world problem, right? But I'm just okay, I'm going to be down for the count, at least for a couple of days, if not a week or more. And I really need you, Joey. I'm just thinking how much I need you to step up and take care of the kids and do all, think of all the things I do. And I am not going to be doing them at all. Again, at least for a couple of days, if I'm hoping for a week to 2 weeks, trying to rest as much as possible, doing very little. And again, we're married, and I'm still okay, are you going to be there for me? Are you going to be there for me? There's this natural thing of I am so vulnerable in this situation of pregnancy and birth. And so anyway, it's just, I recognize that in the wonderful relationship and situation that I'm in. Even more so, I feel like that's the appropriate response we should have as females. before we enter into a sexual act. And we don't, because I think our culture, I don't know, Emily, like chime in, but is it our culture we're going to blame? Like, who are we going to blame? What are we going to blame? That now there's just this mentality of like, we have this so divorced in our mind of sexual act is also the procreative act, and that can still result in that. And it's often so much just, well, no, we can engage in this equally, men and women, and just enjoy the pleasure, and that's it. And we don't have to think about anything else. And so we don't, right? And so then contraception fails, we get pregnant, something else, that procreative part comes into it. And we're like, well, hang on, I just signed up for the pleasure. And it's like, but this act means more than that. Even if we still, no matter how much contraception we throw at this act, it still has a double meaning. It's procreative and unitive. It's both of those things. And I just think as women, we don't broach this hard conversation enough to say, like, we are also responsible for our part. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, so in regards to single mothers, like we're talking about mothers that get pregnant out of wedlock originally, not mothers and fathers that are married that bring children into the world and then end up getting divorced. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. Right.
So,
actually, Emily, hang on a second. So, okay, just for everyone that's listening, like Emily and I are literally having this conversation in real time. So we're just bantering back and forth our thoughts and ideas. Okay, so I would say yes, but I would also, for the most part, but I would also say, right, that in some cases when there might be a divorce situation, and I know I've witnessed this too, is like, well, how much forethought was put in on the front end? Like, again, so people change, things change. Yes, maybe. But I think in most cases, right? And we talk about this a lot when we talk about marriage prep and like having conversations beforehand. Like, if we do like our due diligence to prepare, well, then sure, we just got to kind of let the chips fall where they may. And if something happens, it happens. But I think in a lot of cases, it's like, oh, well, this just happened to me, right? Like, I know I can do that. Like, this just happened to me without any like pause to consider a part that I might have played, or, well, did I do my due diligence before marrying this person? Yes or no? Does that make sense? So anyway.
No, yeah, no, it does, because so just to equate that to what we were talking about originally, in the sense of thinking about joining, like all the responsibility that comes with participating in the act of intercourse. It's like, okay, did the married couple understand all of the responsibility that comes with participating in that sacrament, right? So responsibility once again takes on a bigger term and a more broad, part of our lives, because we're talking, I mean, it comes into play in every aspect of our life, right? Like how prepared are we for whatever the decision is that we're making, or how prepared are we for the result of whatever's happening? Just like you were saying, like we think that we didn't play a part in it, but did we, because of lack of responsibility, maybe? Or lack of like reflection on just our actions, perhaps.
Right. And I think like this is where it's actually easy for me to not judge someone's heart in these situations, Emily, because we're just so disordered in this realm of life in our culture. Things are just literally upside down and inside out and all over the place, that, the Lord really, I mean, he judges the heart. Like he knows, your state of mind and everything that all the information you had before entering into a certain situation, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel very comfortable talking about this topic and not feeling judgmental at all, because I recognize kind of the stew of misinformation and just bad formation that we live in nowadays. But I think nonetheless, how does that change? It changes by pausing to think about it. So in Humani Vitae, this is like one of my favorite sections in there. It's this section, starts with paragraph 10. It's on responsible parenthood. And so there's a line in there. So responsible, I'm just going to read this little part here. With regard to man's innate desires and emotions, responsible parenthood means that man's reason and will must exert control over them. I just like that fundamental Catholic view of the reason and the will in the context of marriage, even like that married couples have to exert responsible parenthood, that we're not called to just random, to let the passion go to the wind. Like we are called to use our will and our reason to exert control over our emotions and our innate drives, things that we feel like an impulse to. It takes me back to that. I think I've shared this before on the podcast, but that high school moment I had in biology when I raised my hand and I was like, do squirrels, it was, have I told you this or did I just share it in my story, Emily? This. Okay, I remember, but it was like, I remember this. My hand just flew up. I didn't even think, but I just said, we were looking at it was like some mating practice or something. And there were squirrels like mating. Our biology teacher was showing us this video. And I raised my hand and asked, do squirrels mate do squirrels do that just for pleasure? Because we do that. We have a pleasure ball. Everyone laughed, and as if I was because I would sometimes make weird comments anyway. So then everyone thought I was just joking, but I was so genuinely interested. And he didn't answer me. The teacher just laughed and kind of continued on thinking oh, Amy's just making a random comment. But I literally wanted to know. And it wasn't until years later when something I had read from Thomas Aquinas that said, no, animals act on instinct like that. They have this, we're in heat, we have to mate. And they do it because that's what animals do. But we are not like that. We have reason and will to control those set emotions and drives and desires, etc. So anyway, I say all that because, again, I think it's just important to put the conversation out into the ether to say, hey, maybe we can approach intercourse. Maybe women have the responsibility to approach intercourse with the mindset of fatherhood, which is that I do not want to engage in an act of intercourse with you unless I think you're going to be a good father. And what does that mean? You're going to play with my kids, or you're going to play with the kids, and, no, that's great. But are you going to provide for our kids and take care of me when I'm in the vulnerable state of pregnancy and new baby? Are you going to live up to your level of responsibility? Of course, not demanding perfection, right? But are you even aware of that responsibility? And just having that command over those desires and those emotions, I guess, before we enter into those acts. But oftentimes, right, it's usually portrayed, especially in media, but it even happens in real life, is the hookup culture where, nope, we're at a party, you're cute, the other person's cute, you're attractive, you have all the feelings, and you just kind of go with it, which is why, consumption of alcohol, drug use, etc., lowers our inhibitions and we act without thinking about it, which is yet another reason. Sorry, I'm totally going on a tangent, Emily. You have to interrupt me.
No, it's good.
The role of parents, right? Well, maybe it's not a good idea to let my kids go to this certain event because sure, they might be quote unquote great kids, but they also have they're learning about command over their emotions and desires. And this is just not a good setting, right? Our setting matters. What's around us matters. People around us matter. All of those contexts really matter. So anyway.
I feel like it ultimately goes back to chastity and how strong are we in that virtue. And I mean, I know I said this recently, I just did not have an understanding of that virtue. And after you read that section in Humanae Vitae and ultimately that's what it's talking about. It's not even using that word, but it's having the control of all aspects of our life. I really think about that term self-mastery. I really keep going back to that when I think about chastity. And, so often chastity just gets linked with sexual acts. And that's just not the case. That virtue means so much more and control over just all aspects of your life, right? Almost like responsibility, really. And so when we're talking about parents letting your kids go like to different things, how I don't know if these are the right terms, but like how good is their chastity? Like in all things, like do they have self-control over other things? So you feel confident in like, you know what? I know how they respond in X, Y, or Z. I feel like they would be able to make good choices. And there is a difference. I mean, hopefully we know our kids and we're not putting them in a bad situation by letting them go to different things. But at the same time, you hope that you've formed them, like these encyclicals have been talking about, like we've been reading about, like you hope that you've done the foundation work so that these conversations can be had on the ordinary, just between you and your kids about, what we're called to and what we're not called to, and just being responsible. I mean, that term is really such a blanket term for every decision we make, right? Just like not making haste decisions and things that are life altering, really.
But it's not sexy. Responsibility is not sexy. No one says like, oh, I want to have responsible sex. Like, no one says that. But the church says that. The church says, well, that's what you're called to do. And God says that. God says that's what you're called to do. And in the context of responsibility, there gets great pleasure and enjoyment and freedom. The irony, right, is like the responsible aspect of it is like playing on the playground next to the busy highway with secure fence. The lack of responsibility is playing on the playground next to the unsafe highway with no fence. And you're trying to figure it out and navigate, well, wait, how do I play when I'm in a dangerous zone here? And that's not of God. God would not do that to us. He establishes that fence so that we can have life and have it abundantly. So it's not meant to be negative, as I think we, right? Like all of us sinners, right? Like as we would initially interpret that to mean. But the other part that this came up, you made good points, Emily. And the other time that this came up recently, which is why I wanted to bring it to you as a topic for the podcast, was Joey and I were watching, I think I mentioned to you, like some sports documentaries. And not all, but a couple of the athletes, they grew up with single moms. And it just kind of came up to my mindset again about like they all love, and rightly so, like love their moms, so much, and are so grateful for all that they've done for them and the sacrifices they've made. All good things, all true. Okay, not negating any of that. And at the same time, I just kept thinking, I was like, but like mom, she didn't do the best job of like picking dad, And again, I'm just like, in my pondering is like, isn't that our responsibility as women, is to say, again, this act I'm engaging in with you speaks with my body how much I think of you. You will make a good husband and you will make a good father. And that's why I feel safe in engaging in this act with you. Safety is like, it's such an important thing. And I think this contraception introduces its own safety, right? Like, okay, well, I'm safe from the vulnerability of pregnancy and motherhood by using this. So now I can just enjoy the pleasurable aspect of it,
That is totally true. I never thought about that word safe, but I do remember just personally thinking about dating. And I remember that feeling when I was dating Josh, like I just felt safe, but I wasn't thinking about it in the context of safe if we had a family, safe if, I really don't know what I was thinking about it particularly, but it was an overwhelming feeling. So much so I've reread some journal things that I wrote even, during the dating time. And like, I wrote about that. And so that is that's a good biomarker, I feel like, to kind of gauge, like, how do you feel with the person that you're with? Like, I'm not talking about in acts of intercourse. I'm just talking about dating. Like, how do you feel dating this person? Like, do you feel safe when you're with them? Or are you constantly like, looking around to make sure everything's okay,
Right.
I never thought about that, but that would be part of that discernment process with, is this someone that you want to be with forever? Like,
right. Yeah.
but
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
to finish that thought though, but once again, so often, like you're talking about, a lot of times these babies perhaps, and maybe not, I don't know the percentage of our babies born out of wedlock in like generally the hookup culture type aspect, or does it come from like a dating relationship or a relationship that's, a little bit more advanced in length of time? I don't know the answer to that, but I think, as time has gone on in a dating relationship, hopefully if you're continuing to date somebody, it's not just out of complacency, but it's out of because you are hopeful that you're going to get married. I don't know how often that happens either. I think it's very easy to get complacent in relationships, actually, especially if you're living together, right? Like it's just easy. But if I would hope that the thought of if an unwanted pregnancy happened in a longer term relationship, it would be less of a quote unquote big deal than because you've been with them for longer, I guess, as opposed, even though you're not married, as opposed to these thoughts aren't even coming up in the hookup culture. Like you're not even thinking, even when before you go to a party or if you're at a party or wherever you are, like you're not thinking about like, oh, I wonder if these people, these men would be great to, share a life with, both realistically and figuratively. So, it really, I think we have to have all of these thoughts before we ever enter into those scenes, right? Like we have to have thought about this ahead of time. Like, I know that this is what could happen. I know what I'm called to. I know what the church teaches. Everyone makes mistakes. Like it's not possible to think that because someone knows all the right things that they're never going to make a bad decision. Like that's not possible. But we also have to understand the value of life and also understand like if life occurs in those acts of intercourse, like God allowed that and he will use that life for good. And perhaps that will change, hopefully that will change both the mother and the father's, lifestyle or perspective or, you know, just behavior, so to speak. But it's just hopefully having the foundation before something like that happens so that you don't make a rash decision to abort your baby, or you don't, like, you understand what you're doing in the big picture, even if you didn't understand what you were doing in that moment.
Absolutely. I know we have to wrap up here in a few minutes, but I wanted to just share the story. I was just reminded of as you were talking, Emily, is I remember sitting in a meeting with a woman. Well, not really a meeting, like I don't want to give too many details about the context because I think it'll make it obvious a little bit more about like, I don't know if anyone listening like would know exactly who I'm talking about, but it would maybe just lend too much information. But I'm sitting one-on-one with this person, and single mom, working multiple jobs, and really does love her kids, obviously. And I don't know if any of the kids had the same dad. I think they all had a different dad. And I think she had three. I can't remember now, either three or four. But the conversation we were having was a very like real world conversation about one of the children and the child's needs, etc. And as we're having this conversation, and like I wasn't talking in like a harsh way. We were literally having like it had a good relationship. We were just kind of going back and forth. And I was sharing something about like something with this child, and she just starts crying, Oh gosh, I could even start crying thinking about it. And she starts crying because, oh gosh, oh my gosh, because she felt the weight, like she felt very aware of her responsibility in the situation, and that like, I kind of did this to myself. Like I have a part to play in this, like the weight of contrition. sorrow for one's sins is such a beautiful thing. And I can see how it melts the Lord's heart, and it's such a grace from God to be given that awareness. And so not for shame, but to know, okay, the empowering part about all of this, right? The empowering part about responsibility, the empowering part about redemption is that, like, okay, I can make a different choice now. Like, I can go forward and do something different. And that was my experience in my moment of deep conversion, of like the Lord offering me another way. Well, you could do it like this. Like, oh, what? Like, what? There's another way? Like, this is amazing. And in her case, she was in so much pain and suffering with the amount of responsibility she had over these children and being by herself and all the things. It was like that amount of weight, which she was never meant to carry by herself, because you're not meant to do that by yourself, right? Like, it broke her, and she just felt so aware of like, well, if I hadn't engaged in intercourse without kind of the interview process, right, of having someone stable with me, then maybe I wouldn't be in this situation. And again, it's not to sit and dwell on that for too long. God is sovereign. He provides. He is ultimately the Father of all of us. But it was just such a beautiful moment, Emily. Like, it can bring me to tears, and also just gives me that shake of like the fear of the Lord, how powerful God is in our lives to bring those awarenesses in such a gentle but convicting and powerful way. And yeah, anyway, I just for whatever reason just thought of that story as a great kind of example or moment. And I don't know, kind of moving forward, what other choices she went on to make with her life. But yeah, to be there to witness that in that conversation, and then to have the grace on my part, right, to see the sorrow, and like to cry with, like, to have that moment of empathy, when you experience true empathy with another, Emily.
That's a gift.
It is. It's such a powerful moment to be able to be there with people and to feel that sorrow, and to feel tears. Yeah, and to feel the love, though, of Christ, like to feel that love for them in that moment of like, I just couldn't hug her hard enough, and I just held her hand, and this is the thing, though, it felt like love in what Scripture says, and that, like, not to rejoice with wrongdoing, but to rejoice in the truth. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. And then we were both able to recognize the wrongdoing, but rejoice in the truth of what she was kind of coming to in her mind of like, oh, okay, like, here's my part, and here's what I can do to change it too. I often think that with responsibility, how, again, maybe not the quote unquote sexiest term, right? But it's so empowering because it means that, like, I have a part to play. Like, there is something I can do. I'm not at the mercy. I'm not helpless. I'm not helpless, if that makes sense. Helpless, definitely not hopeless.
No, it does. I just think about it in regards to charting our cycle, right? Like, something's going on, or maybe it's not, but it's just the responsibility of knowing your body and being able to recognize when it's doing what it should and when it's not, And
Yeah.
so that, it is very, very empowering. I mean, I use that term a lot when I talk about charting our bodies. Like, it's so empowering to know what things should be happening and what things shouldn't.
Right. Right. I agree. I completely agree. And I think it's such a, woe to the one by whom sin comes. And I think especially in the month of November, when we think about the dead, we think about the souls in purgatory. And I've mentioned to you before, like, what souls might be there because of my bad example, like, to be pondering the ways in which I might be contributing to a culture that upholds, these disordered views of how our sexual desire can be played out, and in ways that, maybe because of my own fear, discomfort, lack of courage, I haven't spoken up to say, hey, you know what? There's something disordered here, but let's not lose hope. We can change it. We can make different choices. And I just think that is contraception, one of those, the evils it has presented, I think, to females is it's taken away the weight of our own responsibility on that act and on keeping men accountable to that act and keeping ourselves accountable too. And because we're not having that fear, quote unquote, of the vulnerability that can come from it. And so, yeah, I think just as much as we can get back to that full weight of that responsibility, which is one of the other quote unquote blessings, right? Blessing, burden, however you might view it, of NFP is we're not using barrier methods. We're not using artificial means to achieve or avoid. And so we feel that responsibility, the weight of it, the conversations we have to have regularly, again, both to avoid and achieve. How we're using our will, our resources, our relationship to be good stewards over the gifts that God's given us with our bodies and with our marriages. So,
right. I know we didn't touch on the encyclical, and forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, but persona humana.
no clue.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sounds great.
But in the beginning, you were talking about like, how did we get here? And when you were just talking about contraception, so in this encyclical, which I should reference when it was written, December 29th, 1975. Okay. In the encyclical at the beginning, it's talking about just the clergy feeling like they're having to weed through, I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but this lack of knowledge, moral teaching that they're that's coming at them. So like, and it says, especially sexual matters, the growing difficulties experienced by pastors and expanding this teaching effectively, just about sexual matters. Like 1975, you can imagine, like, I'm sure people were definitely not sure what is right, what is wrong. And it made me think, when you were talking about contraception, it made me think of, how did we get here? I just remember learning from a physician talking about Humanae Vitae, and I think I've shared this on the podcast before, but when the birth control pill was introduced, men understood that did take away from their responsibility, because the idea was that the woman was not going to get pregnant. At this time, they didn't think that it could fail. That was not part of any sort of research. I mean, I'm sure there was research showing that it could fail. I don't think that was widely talked about. So as of today, we know contraception fails. It's not a surprise when that happens. It's definitely startling because no one's expecting that, but we all know that's possible, I feel like, in today's world. Back then, when it's introduced, it's as if, oh my goodness, we can totally have intercourse and no one's going to get pregnant. And so when I think about something that was mentioned in that talk, was this really put women that were trying to practice chastity, for example, or were trying to live a moral life, it put them at a disadvantage for finding a husband that would provide for them, because they are now seen like that. They start to get separated, right? Like before the birth control pill, the dating relationship was as if like you're headed towards marriage because you're headed towards intercourse. Not that people weren't having intercourse outside of marriage before the birth control pill, but it wasn't as widespread, so to speak. And so you've got these men now that are thinking, I can have intercourse and not be responsible for it. And so these women that are actually looking for a provider are at a greater disadvantage. And so you just get this slow divide, I think. And so then you're in the 70s, nobody knows what to do and what's really true and not when it comes to, what does the church say? What should I be doing with my body? I cannot imagine the confusion at that time. Like, we have so much information because of the confusion of that time and all of the information that has come out over the last 50 years. Actually, yeah, 60 years. And it's to not have the internet and to just really, I think it goes back to the encyclical we just wrapped up, which was you can learn so much of this within the home of a good family, right? Like just the example. And it doesn't have to be like screamed down the throat of kids, this is right, this is wrong, but just living a beautiful family life where love is at the center of everything when it comes to your marriage, your kids. And so I feel like that's what carried people for so long, right? Was the example. And so much of what was referenced in that previous encyclical. And then they get to this time frame in our world where everything is upside down. And I can't, my mom talks about it a lot. Like she graduated high school in the 70s, and she talks about how she knew that things were wrong, like what was, acceptable during that time, but she didn't, everyone else was doing it. Like it was just common. Anyway, I totally forgot we're trying to wrap up. Sorry, Amy. But just the world was just headed that way, right? Like, and so it's like and the church was also changing. So it's like to know what to do, I think it had to be so confusing.
Yeah. What a great way to put it all in context, I think, Emily. Yeah, that's a really great thing to be thinking about. So I guess I'm always kind of trying to think trying to operate on like solution mindset. Like, okay, how can we bring this conversation of responsibility back into the fold? And right, we're little, we can only do so much, but only do so much. Like it's powerful though when we have the awareness of the truth and the grace to try to live it out as best we can in the world. That can be a shining light on a hill, right? Is to just go home, love your family. And when presented with opportunities to engage with people in conversations about relationships or talking to young people, even outside of your home that have questions, and see a family that, again, no one is perfect. That's not the standard we're trying to live up to here, but you're doing it. And by seeing people do it, it really can give hope to other people that didn't come from that, to know that, oh, it's possible for me to do it too. Like that's one of the things you always hear, right? About people who rise to fame and different, sports or different accolades that they get later in life. And if they came from a home or an environment that was very destructive and awful, but they had someone to look up to, I think we underestimate how living the ordinary life can be something to look up to for people, and can provide a lot of hope of like, okay, well, I can have a family even if I didn't come from a family. Like that's possible. And that is 100% possible, 100%. And so for girls that didn't grow up with responsible motherhood modeled and in those homes, like it's still possible. I mean, that's even my hope today, right? Like I didn't grow up with, I would say, necessarily the best example in ways that I feel like a woman could behave towards her husband or towards her children. Again, did the best, she could, I guess, at the time, but I just feel like there's more. Is there something else I can be doing? And to go with that, just incremental improvement, striving towards, something better. It's great. It's just a good way to operate. I remember going to confession once, and Father said something, because I was expressing some frustration over like a lack of virtue, and I don't know what I said. I must have said something about like feeling a sense of hopelessness or despair. And he paused, and then he said, I wish more people were frustrated they weren't saints. That would be a good thing. Almost like, shoot for the stars and keep shooting for the stars. Like that's a really good goal. And it was just really encouraging, because I think sometimes, in failure, it's easy to say, oh, well, don't worry. No one's perfect. Don't do this. And he didn't say that to me. He's like, no, that's a good goal. You messed up. Try it again. Like don't change the goal. Don't change the goal. Just be more, be realistic, but keep shooting for that. Like keep trying it. And it was just really encouraging. So
That's
I think,
beautiful.
Yeah, I don't think we've said anything here that is completely out of reach for anybody, or is, I don't know, at least maybe I'm biased because I'm the one that said it, right? But like that's unrealistic or that's wrong. I don't think we've been wrong about anything we've said either. So yeah, I think there's just a great opportunity for us as females to kind of take up the gauntlet of our responsibility in the way that our culture and our families are forming right now, and do our part to change it, because otherwise we're helpless and we're at the whims of men. And well, what are the men going to do? And first, well, if they become fathers first, well, then we'll really, take up our responsibility. It's like, well, no, it's not. It's kind of, it takes two to tango. We both have to play our part. And I guess, yeah, I just wanted to bring that to the podcast to say, and we do have a part. Women do have a part to play. So maybe the last thing to say too, Emily, before we completely wrap up, because I think we've tried that a couple times now, but like before we wrap up, I did want to just address too, like, this is not, and I hate doing all the prefacing stuff because I feel like you can preface to the cows come home, all the little side situations that might be happening. But, it is important to say, again, because of the vulnerability of women that can result from the marital act, engaging in the marital act, that it's not that men haven't taken advantage of women in those cases too, which is why I think that it's also important, going back to that whole like policy conversation that I was having with that group of people, that it's important for our culture to value the role of women in motherhood. And I'll post a link to this reflection from Pope Francis on the mother's demanding role, but to recognize the demands of raising children, the role of the mother and the father. And I think because women are so much the bearers of life and play such a responsibility in the early stages of human life and the formation of children, is we need a culture that protects that. And yes, keeps us responsible and, keeps both of us accountable. So to have policies in place where things like rape are a serious crime, like I think that could definitely be elevated to another level of severity for women who experience that type of, violation of their bodies. So anyway, I say that there are bad players on both sides of the gender, right? There's bad players and females, bad moms and the dads and all the things. So yes, having a culture that says, here's our standard, here's our norm, married, children, family, and then anything outside of that, kind of how are we going to address it? What do you think?
Right. And there's hope.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go get the kids. Thank you, Emily. Great conversation.
Great to see you.
Yep. And we'll see you guys next time.
Okay. Bye.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.